Caffeine is the most common psychostimulant in the world. In fact, the caffeine content in coffee beans is lower than in tea leaves. But with a cup of coffee, the body receives 10 times more caffeine than from the same cup of tea. The genus Coffea includes two of the most valuable species, Arabica and Robusta, which account for almost the entire volume of world coffee production. The first has a richer, more subtle aroma and taste, while the second is cheaper, coarser, and more bitter, primarily used for the production of instant coffee. Most brands are a mixture of both. Coffee belongs to the madder family, Rubiaceae, and prefers highlands with a warm climate and abundant rainfall. Its homeland is the territory of modern Ethiopia, where it is still cultivated, but also grows wild. According to legend, a young shepherd noticed that his goats, after eating coffee berries, whose seeds are coffee beans, became unusually frisky and playful. Then he himself became addicted to coffee beans. Whether this is true or not, it seems like sucking coffee beans is the oldest method of consuming them. Later, the berries and leaves were boiled to produce a drink containing invigorating caffeine. This drink was first mentioned in medieval Arabic texts. For several centuries, its use was limited to North Africa and Southwest Asia. Muslim spiritual leaders loved coffee because it helped them stay awake during nightly meditations. Later, the seed spread to the east. From the beginning of the 17th century, the coffee tree began to be grown in India, Sri Lanka, and other Asian countries. Around the same time, Europeans appreciated the properties of coffee. By around 1475, a coffee shop already existed in Constantinople, now Istanbul, and its European visitors were delighted with the new drink. Since the mid-17th century, coffee houses have become an iconic part of European culture. They appeared in London, Paris, Amsterdam, Vienna, and Berlin. No less important than the drink itself was the fact that newspapers were offered in these establishments, and news was discussed, but it was coffee to which they owed their appearance. In Vienna, coffee houses retained important cultural and political significance until recently. The inhabitants of Vienna discovered coffee in 1638, after the siege of the city was lifted when the retreating Ottoman army abandoned its food supplies, including precious grains. Different countries had different tastes in terms of invigorating drinks. Some chose coffee, others tea, but both served as a means of increasing energy and a reason for communication. France briefly became interested in tea, but in the 18th century, coffee prevailed. On the eve of the French Revolution, there were 2,000 coffee shops in Paris. In Britain, tea replaced coffee in the 19th century. It was cheaper and easier to transport and store. In the United States, where coffee shops have existed since at least 1670, coffee emerged as the winner. And the modern history of coffee is closely connected with the economic and political development of the country, which in the 19th century became the largest consumer of coffee in the world. By this time, coffee plantations had spread throughout the world, wherever there was a suitable climate and sufficient labor resources. As a rule, these were the colonial possessions of European states, among which were Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica in the New World, Kenya in Africa, Ceylon for a short time, and Java for a more noticeable period in Asia. Brazil is a coffee producer with a long history. Brazilian crops periodically suffer from unfavorable weather conditions and drought, but mainly from cold snaps, which the coffee tree cannot tolerate. Coffee was so important to the Brazilian national budget that successive governments continually assisted producers by encouraging them to stockpile surpluses to keep world prices high or by providing subsidies during periods of crop failure. International financial tycoons, mostly American, also invested in coffee production or stocks. Growing coffee is a labor-intensive process because the beans are harvested by hand. They do not ripen at the same time, so mechanization does not help. Raw coffee beans are usually sent to the country of consumption for roasting. Roasting may seem like a simple task, but it's not so easy to do it correctly. The longer green coffee beans are roasted, the darker they become. During this process, aromatic volatile components are released, which give coffee its inherent taste and aroma. one of the most wonderful in the world. A freshly opened can of instant coffee gives off this aroma for a short time, but the taste is not the same. Instant coffee for industrial production was invented in 1906 in Guatemala by a Belgian named George Washington, although he was not its first inventor. Washington later moved to the USA. The First World War was beneficial for the spread of a new product that could be consumed wherever one could get a mug of boiling water. The American military calls Washington the soldier's friend. Currently, instant coffee is mainly produced by freezing the extract, which is then dehydrated through dry sublimation. This is how the granules or powder you see in jars are obtained. Nowadays, for many people, coffee means instant coffee, but the recent resurgence in coffee's popularity, now aimed at the geek generation, much like the former benchmarks for fireside and newspaper readers, is creating a new, modern class of consumers who care about the quality, flavor, and style of their caffeine fixes.
If you liked this video, please like it and also subscribe to my channel. There's a lot of interesting stuff here.